the interconnectedness of all those things. And really, you know, I think the important piece, I've been part of the Lower Mainland flood plan and developing that, and you know, really getting a good sense of how we need to almost at times take our blinders off to really discuss the adverse impacts of you know, diking, for an example, on our fish habitat, our traditional sites, our cultural sites, our fishing villages. So really, you know, I think sometimes what we need to do, and really what I was thinking of this morning is how we open our perspective and we open our minds and take our kind of horse blinders off a little bit, and we start thinking collectively. How are we working together as all organizations, all levels of government, all non-government agencies, and really how are we doing this? And you know, we as First Nations people, and I'm going to share a small story with you before I be quiet, but a lot of us, all of us, I'll say all of us, Western education tells us that we as First Nations people, we came from the ice bridge from the other side of the world. And I always understood and told our elders, our elders understood and told us that was somebody did, but we in Semiahmoo, we in some of our extended communities and extended families, we are what we call Hlactamish. And that phrase Hlactamish talks about the survivors of the flood. And we in Semiahmoo, our relative from the south, our late relative from the south in Lummi, he really spoke of the importance of us remembering that we are the survivors of the flood. So when we equate our traditional teachings and what we call our ancient stories, our ancient history of those canoes that were built and the children that were saved from that flood, and the importance of the children, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, because the work that we're doing in this lifetime, we may never see the fruits of our labor. We're laying a foundation, and we may never even see the impacts of this work that we're doing. But really, the opportunity to save our young people and do the work to help our future generations is extremely, extremely important. But our old oral history tells us that the children were saved, and from that we became the Hlactamish people, survivors of the flood. So when we put those in line with Western science, you know, we understand that last major flood that happened in this area was somewhere in the area of 10,000 years ago. So we've been able to persevere and survive, but really our story, our origin as modern, I won't say modern, but the survivors of that flood come from that raising of the waters. It really does. So, and I always say, you know, we're going to hit many waves of that flood in our time as people. So just as it being a very beautiful Friday morning, and I really want to kind of set a tone here. So I'm gonna share a small song. I wasn't gonna, and again, I don't prepare for these things, so I just kind of go on a whim. But the song that I'm gonna sing, and I'm gonna share a little bit. Sometimes we use our drum. I use these little, what we call skeets, and they're just little sticks, little paddles. And actually, these paddles are quite old. These were from one of our Upwiak, our old great grandparents. And the song that I'm going to sing is that flood song that was our late elder from Lummi, Tliuk. He would talk to us about the importance of remembering who we are and where we come from. And it's been right about a year now that he's been gone. But he was really the one, and I make it important for myself to reiterate his words now that especially now that he's gone. And the importance of us sharing this with all of you online is is we've been here before. We're going to do the work, and we're going to, you know, we're going to be okay. But the importance of that is really that collaboration, and sometimes taking out of our, you know, out of our wheelhouse, sometimes our small scope of work, and being able to open up and how do we incorporate traditional knowledge? How do we incorporate science? How do we incorporate the understanding of the interconnectedness of everything, as opposed to just let's build a wall. Let's build a wall there. We fix the flood problem. That's not, you know, it might not be the solution. So, you know, they're very, very creative and innovative. And I know Jillian's going to speak on some of the work that's happening, but creative and innovative works that are happening. And one that pops to my mind is the living dike that the city of Surrey and city of Delta and Semiahmoo and Tsawwassen are working on collaboratively together to really look at different ways to do this, to do this in different ways. But I'll stop there. But I just really want to thank, you know, the organizers and each and every one of you for being here, because our work is the stepping stone and the foundation for our children and our grandchildren to take over, because this process that we're in is a long, lifelong, intergenerational process. So just in saying that, I'm just going to ask you to, you know, whatever that means. My elder would tell me, be a prayerful mind. And I know when I get onto big things like that, I don't like using that word prayer because it puts some people off, but be of a centering mind, whatever that means. Some people, you put your feet on the ground. Some people, you'll sit a little more comfortably in your chair. You know, some of you, you'll take a few breaths and just really kind of call yourself to the work that we're doing, because you're coming from one angle and we're all coming from different angles, and we're going to try to kind of make this work that's happening gain strength so that it grows and it evolves and it expands. So I'm probably taking up too much of the agenda, and that's okay. Crash course on what we call Indian time. It happens when it happens, and it goes when it goes, and it starts when it starts, and it ends when it ends. We don't really run by that crazy little clock that drives us bonkers some days. So again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I natachul nisquilmo si shang quam shasha hualixan si o Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here this morning. Just a small explanation of the words that are in that song. You know, really it says, we are the survivors of the flood. Stand strong, my First Nation, my Indian people. You know, remember who you are, because I am the survivor of the flood. So just a little bit, I'll share this morning. And again, I just want to thank the organizers and thank each and every one of you that are online here today for the very, very important work that you're undertaking. Thank you. Aichka.
Wow, thank you so much, Chief Chappel. That was amazing. A real gift to have you speak. And the more time, the better in my mind. I love your words and feel like it starts us off on such a good way. yeah, feel free to share your appreciation in the chat box too. I just want to take a moment. I think it's important for settler folks like me to also acknowledge the truths and harms of settler colonialism and systemic racism and ongoing effects on First Nations, and particularly the disproportionate effects and impacts and risk that flooding and loss of salmon and more recently COVID have on the First Nations of the Lower Fraser. And I just want to quickly show, this map shows a provincial floodplain, a map, a 1 in 200 year flood event overlaid with First Nations reserves in the floodplain of the Lower Fraser, at risk of flooding in any given year. And it's estimated that 90% of reserves across Canada are located in floodplains. And I think for that reason, it's important to acknowledge that the systems that were designed to control the river and flooding are created by settlers, were created by settlers and connected to the same settler colonial systems and policies that also forcefully and with violence displaced and bound First Nations to these reserves, left largely unprotected on floodplains across Canada. These same systems are also connected in that same way to the atrocities that that are now being brought to international attention. And I think it's important to bring that, and I hope it's okay that I share it in that way. And I'm taking the time to say this because I hear from many Indigenous people that many of us, and particularly white settlers, are eager to skip uncomfortable truths and move quickly to reconciliation. But for settlers, this is our history and truth too, and the effects continue to harm Indigenous people and benefit those with privilege. So I also hear that there are too many words without action. So on behalf of myself and Resilient Waters, I just want to share that we are committed to listening and learning and reflecting so that we can act better, acknowledging that we will make mistakes and commit to learn from them and do better in the future. So I'm very happy to hear any feedback and corrections and thoughts that can be shared about this, so then connect with me. And thank you so much, Chief Chappel, for your welcome in that way. With that in mind, I just did want to say quickly, one group that has been helping us to guide us our work in this way with First Nations partners is the Emergency Planning Secretariat. So I'd like to hand it over to Jillian for a moment just to share a little bit about what the Emergency Planning Secretariat gets up to. I just realized I need to let Jillian unmute herself as well. Jillian, are you able to unmute now? There we go.
Yes.
Thanks. Perfect.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, as Dan said, my name is Jillian Fuss. I'm the project coordinator for the Emergency Planning Secretariat. And thanks, Dan, for yeah, those really good words and setting our meeting off in the right way, and to Chief Chappel for the amazing welcome. I hope you get to do that for more of our meetings. No, he says. But yeah, so the Emergency Planning Secretariat, I have the real pleasure of working for a leadership committee made up of Chief Chappel, as well as Tribal Chief Tyrone McNeil, Councillor Murray Ned, Councillor Rick Bailey, and Chief Angie Bailey, who are Indigenous leaders in the Lower Mainland, who've come together because we I mean, as Dan was mentioning, there's a long history of First Nations either being directly impacted by colonial practices when it comes to emergency management, or receiving very little emergency services and having not enough capacity to be able to have those emergency services on their own. And so we, for example, one of the common practices is for emergency response, sometimes forgoing consultation or involvement of First Nations communities and undergoing emergency work, and in that way causing a destruction or disruption of cultural sites, spiritual sites, or other things like that. So one of the things that the Secretariat, Emergency Planning Secretariat wants to do is to be able to build up a First Nations, mainland Coast Salish First Nations, since we work from Squamish to Semiahmoo up to Yale, which is a little bit above Hope, is to allow mainland Coast Salish First Nations to identify what their priorities would be for emergency planning and response, and build that out so that communities can drive their own directions. So right now, what we're working on, our long-term goal to do that is a mainland Coast Salish emergency plan, which is rooted in Sendai as well as in DRIPA. So it's based on all 4 pillars of the Sendai framework, which is really exciting. And of course, we're going to be working in all hazards. And in this area, we have a variety of different hazards, everything from volcanoes to earthquakes, to forest fires now as well with climate change. So there's quite a bit of work to do. We're definitely not going to finish it this year, but the first thing that we're working on is flooding. So for example, that can look like looking at what does risk, how do we manage risk, how do we define risk for each community individually, and then together as a region, what risk assessment methodology makes sense, what risk reduction methods do communities want to see. So many communities, for example, like Chief Chappel was saying, may not be satisfied with the dike. They may instead want to see some other methods. So if there's a way we can synergize flood management with restoration of habitat by providing water storage or cleaning out sloughs, maybe those are things that we would rather see in this region. And then also working on improving emergency management and response capacity. So by one of the things we're planning on doing is to assist in the coordination of regional hubs so that each community doesn't have to do this alone. They can assist each other, and then also to improve training and capacity within communities. And so of course, all of that works involves a lot of working with communities, as well as the EPS provides advocacy support for things that communities would like to see in the region, as well as participating on projects that match with some of the values that we've heard that the communities that we work for have mentioned. So in that way, we've connected up with Dan and the amazing work that he's been doing on the Resilient Waters project, which has grown from just looking at fish-friendly infrastructure to what it is now, which is, I think, really pushing the way that we think about flooding in this region, which is really exciting because there are a number of other flood management activities happening, and I think Resilient Waters is really on the cutting edge. So thanks, Dan.
Well, kind words, Jillian. Very generous. Thank you for sharing a bit about EPS. Okay, without further ado, we're gonna get right back into it. So just quickly, the flow for today. Go over a couple of housekeeping items, a quick overview of Resilient Waters, very quick, and then we're going to get 2 overview presentations, one from Bob Carey of Floodplains by Design, a kind of state level look at integrated floodplain management from his perspective, and then Kathleen Berger, is that right? I didn't even check. Okay, nice. Floodplain, Berger or Berger. Floodplains for the Future initiative at the county scale, and she's been so kind and generous to arrange some wonderful panelists and folks that she works with to talk about it from each of their individual perspectives. So then we'll move into a panel conversation fueled by questions from you. So yeah, sorry about this again, Harley. I did hit the record button right in the middle of your chat. Again, you can use that chat box to repeat things you like, share resources with each other, ask kind of detailed, if you have a really like small detail on a question you want to ask, go for it. If you want to answer a question that you feel like you have an answer, go for it, and have those cheeky private side chats if you like. Later on, we are going to be using Slido for gathering your questions. So if you go to slido.com, you can enter Floodplains, the code Floodplains into there. And then you'll be able to answer those questions. So right now, right away, I'd love it if everybody just hopped in and started to enter in what kind of group or organization you're representing. So if you go to slido.com, just trying to see where my link is for this. If you go to slido.com, you'll be able to, there we go. Now we're seeing some results pile in here. Nice. That's awesome. Okay, we're getting a lot of local regional government representation here. Oops. What have I done? Okay, great. Well, we'll shut it down there, but thanks everyone for playing along. So you can just keep that window open. You can keep it open on your phone or any device to start to seed questions and answers. I'm seeing answers still flood in. Okay, we've got a pretty good cross-sector representation here. That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to kick it along since we're short on time. Yeah, a really quick overview on the Resilient Waters project. This has been started in November 2019 after some work that Watershed Watch Salmon Society and Lena Aziz, who's also in the call with us today, has been doing for the last 6 years now almost on the Connected Waters campaign. Really looking at how we can connect salmon habitat up by upgrading or modifying flood infrastructure along the lower Fraser, basically between Richmond and Hope. How we're doing it, starting out with a big prioritization of what the opportunities are through meeting with folks, meeting with First Nations, local governments. Since we started out, we've identified a lot of great opportunities through those conversations and research. We've been facilitating cross-sector meetings between local governments and First Nations to push those opportunities forward and start to plan for them. We're giving technical guidance and helping with fundraising and continuing to work on these projects. And we're really excited about the potential and the opportunities in the coming years for that, especially as we see a glut of infrastructure funding coming our way. So yeah, it's a lot of great people. And again, just to acknowledge our funders in this right now is the Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So I'll kick it right along and hand it over to Bob Carey, who is the Strategic Partnerships Director for the Nature Conservancy in Washington. He has over 20 years experience in the field of conservation with a particular focus on empowering communities, building partnerships, and crafting innovative solutions to address environmental challenges. He is a founder and leader of the Floodplains by Design initiative, an ambitious public-private partnership focused on building resilient river communities and ecosystems across Washington. Bob is humbled daily by his amazing partner and kids, and happiest with a pack on his back, skis on his feet, or a paddle in his hand. Thanks so much for being with us today, Bob.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the lovely introduction, and I'm just filled with honor and gratitude for all of you that are devoted to this work and for being here today. And Chief Chappel for your important and inspirational words. I am speaking to you today from the Skagit Valley in Washington, so not too far from many of you. And this is the ancestral homelands of the Skagit and Swinomish and other Coast Salish peoples who've lived here, stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Filled with gratitude for being here, and also just want to acknowledge our awareness of the uncovering of all the unmarked children's graves and sites up in Saskatchewan and Kamloops, and acknowledge that those two findings are probably just the tip of the iceberg, and the trauma that must be creating that has carried on for generations, and is really a sort of intergenerational trauma that the First Nations are feeling. And so my heart goes out to all of you for that. So as Dan indicated, let me see if I can talk and share my screen at the same time here. I have had the great opportunity to be one of the founders and leaders of the Washington State Floodplains by Design initiative, and have had the deep pleasure to work with the folks like you'll hear from later today with Floodplains for the Future Coalition and the Puyallup Watershed. And let me, so the general proposition that Floodplains by Design puts forth is listed here. And I think this reflects part of what Chief Chappel was saying, that so many of these issues that land in floodplains are interconnected. And if we can work in a more collaborative, integrated, multi-benefit way, it will actually yield better results for all of us. And I've been blessed to be able to work in the field of river management and conservation. This is heart work for me. It's really about trying to provide a future for our children and our children's children and our great-great-grandchildren that, some semblance of the quality of life that we've all been blessed with. In what is really some of the richest, most productive landscapes on the planet. Floodplains comprise about 1% of the terrestrial surface area of planet Earth and produce 27% of the ecosystem services that humans benefit in terms of alluvial soils, abundant fisheries, clean water, recreation, beauty, so many things that we depend on and enjoy. But unfortunately, our track record for stewarding these lands, these floodplain areas, hasn't been so great. And the trends are the trends that have persisted through time and that are being exacerbated through climate change are dramatically increasing flooding, continued loss of biodiversity and fish habitats, and loss of farmland and continued impacts on agriculture from increased flooding and as well as drought on the other side of the spectrum. So really what Floodplains by Design is about is, it's an initiative in Washington State that was launched to encourage a more integrated approach where we get people out of their silos, help them work together in a more collaborative, integrated way to produce, and provide all those things that we hope for: reduce flood risk, increased fisheries, healthier habitat, cleaner water, viable ag land, et cetera. So I'm just going to play a quick video that is some of our really important voices of local partners speak a little bit about what Floodplains by Design is about. Let me know.
Rivers define a place. The places that we live and work, the fundamentals of our economy, are all dependent on how the rivers have shaped the landscape. They're the most valuable part of the environment.
I live in the floodplain, and I grew up right here. Being able to come here fishing or recreating, all of those things are important to us and to our families.
As a tribal member, fishing is important. It's just a part of our lifeblood. It's essential to our way of life and our spiritual health.
I was a farmer for 40 years on this piece of property. If you don't have enough water at the right time, you go broke. If you get too much water at the wrong time and damages your land and your crops, you also go broke. The river is a lifeline in effect.
So all that kind of fundamentals of life are directly connected to the river. So when you modify the river, change how the river functions, those modifications kind of ripple throughout society. The river is just doing what it's doing. It's responding to those changes in ways that really cause us problems.
I've been through multiple floods of lots of different variations.
If your land floods, it's going to be tantamount to disaster on your successful operation.
I've seen houses completely washed off their foundations. I've seen whole neighborhoods destroyed. I've seen co-workers washed away. So there's this very hard, very consequential part of this. all hope is not lost. The systems have been compromised, but they still have a lot of resiliency in them. And so if you can undo things, the river will respond. Collaboration paves the way for moving forward.
We can't do it all ourselves. Even if we could, we wouldn't want to, because this is something we need to share.
Floodplains by Design provides an environment where those discussions can occur that didn't exist before. It's much easier and much better, and I would say much more cost-effective and with a much longer design life than things that we used to do in the past.
We are optimistic. I am optimistic. We're on a mission. We're on a mission. I'm committed to that mission.
This is legacy stuff. It's people legacy, lives and property legacy, environmental legacy, sense of place legacy. It's all these things.
Sorry about this. Not sure why it's not advancing. All right, you see the next slide now? Great, thanks. So this is a quick synopsis of the way the Floodplains by Design initiative works. A lot of you may be familiar with the Floodplains by Design grant program that helps support and incentivize this kind of work. And then we complement that, similar to Resilient Waters, with a peer learning network that helps build capacity and help us all work together to learn into this more, what we think is, successful but complex body of work, our approach to managing our river corridors. And this is one of the products of that peer learning network, where we try to synthesize what it takes to really do this collaborative, integrated floodplain management. And there's a lot here that I'll just leave up on screen, but just draw your attention to a few really important things. And you'll hear more about this from the Floodplains for the Future group in a minute. But we're talking about deep collaboration here, right? Not developing your project ideas and taking them out for public review, input or review after you've already developed them, but really bringing people to the table at the beginning, making sure they're really involved in the vision setting, the goal setting, the identification of the plans, the designing of the project work. And the grant program basically requires that you get letters of support from the First Nations, or the tribes as we call them in the States, before you can go forward. If you're working in an agricultural area, you need the support of the agricultural organizations. You need the support of whoever the flood authorities are in that area. And then, the projects that are being funded are not just integrated in nature to not just do one thing, but to try to really deliver multiple benefits. But we're encouraging people to work at the scale of the project. So a lot of the what we call projects are actually suites of projects up and down river corridors, where these different interests are coming together to try to manage for, essentially flood, fish, and farm at the scale of that system. And then finally, we're trying to hold ourselves accountable to the flood, to the fish, to the agricultural, and to recreation and other goals that we set for this program. So we measure that success both at the state level and increasingly at a local level. And so just to show you how this is working, we did a survey a couple years ago of all these different interest groups and said, how's this going for you? And to go back to that initial thesis that we started out Floodplains by Design with, the vast majority of them said they did see, this increase in collaboration and integration, and it was yielding real results in terms of new partnerships, more funding, more political support, bigger project opportunities, reduced, legal and other delays. And the project work on the ground, we started back in 2013. We took 9 projects to the state legislature, said, hey, will you fund these projects which they did. And over the last 8 years, the state legislature has allocated $215 million to what was a brand new program just 8 years ago. And there's literally dozens of projects and hundreds of millions of dollars of project work, integrated, multi-benefit project work developing across the state now. And yielding, as you see, this is just some of the outcomes up through last year, I think, that have been delivered on the ground so far. And thousands of people that have reduced flood risk, thousands of acres of ag land that is been improved, either protected or improved through better infrastructure, drainage or flood control infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure in some places, and thousands of acres that are being restored across these different floodplain systems. So one of our stars in doing this work are the folks that you are about to hear, Kathleen and her panel of guests speak to the Floodplains by the Future, Floodplains for the Future program in the Puyallup River watershed. And as you listen to them talk today, I would encourage you to think about those factors of integrated floodplain management that I tried to highlight, the ways that they're collaborating, the structures that they're putting in place to make that happen, the scale at which they're working, the way they're delivering these better project outcomes, but then also holding themselves accountable to make sure that all the different interests that they're working with are achieving those goals. So again, thank you all. It's a real honor to be with you here today.
Thanks so much, Bob. And a great lead in to Kathleen will give a short an overview of the Floodplains for the Future work. And while Kathleen's getting her presentation prepped, I'll give her a little bio here too. So Kathleen Berger is the Floodplains for the Future coordinator, a position hosted by Pierce County Surface Water Management. Kathleen increases the capacity for collaboration throughout the Puyallup watershed by helping Floodplains for the Future partners build cross-organizational trust, develop clear roles within the partnership, and form a shared understanding of one another's work. She also schedules a lot of meetings. So over to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Bob, for the introduction on Floodplains by Design. I'll start with, I'm speaking from the city of Tacoma in Washington, which is the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people and the Puyallup tribe. And I want to acknowledge that that's where this presentation is coming from. So as Dan said, I am the Floodplains for the Future coordinator, and today I'm presenting on behalf of the Floodplains for the Future partnership. Thank you for having us. It's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to showcasing some of the FFtF work today. And actually, I'm going to speed through some of this because while I do love to spotlight these wonderful folks and their dedication and expertise, they are here in person to talk about that. And let's be honest, that's way better. So we'll get started. The Puyallup Watershed covers approximately 670,000 acres, and I took to Google and did some conversions. So if these are wrong, it's Google's fault, not mine, I promise, but it's 271,139 hectares from Mount Rainier to Commencement Bay with 3 major river systems, the Puyallup River, the Carbon River, and the White River. The floodplain of these systems makes up approximately 46,000 floodplain acres, so 18,000 give or take hectares. Including streams and tributaries, this watershed contains over 700 river miles, 1,126 kilometers, and Floodplains for the Future partners are actively working across about 300 river miles, so 482 kilometers. With 24 floods of significance in the last 100 years, a 70% loss in agricultural land from its peak, and Chinook of natural origin at a fraction of historic abundance, the Puyallup watershed is at a critical moment in time. And yet, one area where the watershed is truly thriving is the heart and dedication of the Floodplains for the Future partners. 22 partner organizations work and collaborate to leverage work with one another to advance the watershed together towards a shared vision here on the screen. The primary focus of this partnership is to balance the ability of flood, fish, and farm interests to meet their needs to exist and thrive within the Puyallup watershed. The program has broad partner support and tribal engagement. The commitment of the partners is demonstrated in the institutionalization of collaboration and by the work continuing to move forward despite challenges, ranging from state budget delays to global health crises. Collaboration and cooperation extends beyond regularly attending partners to occasionally include Burlington Northern Railroad, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Army Corps of Engineers, to name a few. The work is not without its challenges among stakeholders. The structure of FFtF, which we'll talk about in a little bit, allows for conflict resolution and continued relationship building with one another over time. And it continues to change and adapt with the needs of the collaboration. To meet this shared vision, FFtF partners have identified a set of watershed-wide goals relevant to improving and maintaining floodplain health. This is a short list of our goals summarized. As you can see, there's reconnect floodplain, reduce flood risk, increase salmon abundance, and protect and conserve agricultural lands, as well as a few others. The actions on this list describe the types of projects that are implemented through the partnership. And I'll talk a little bit about each action and what has been accomplished since we started tracking them since 2013. But the partnership here in the Puyallup Watershed really goes beyond 2013, which was the official start of Floodplains for the Future. So it started much earlier, which we can also talk about. So the Puyallup, White, and Carbon rivers are geologically young, glacial-fed, braided rivers. They carry a large sediment bed load. With 72 linear miles, I didn't convert that one, apologies, of levees and revetments preventing channel migration, the Puyallup watershed system is constrained and disconnected from most of the natural floodplain. Pierce County maintains this levee system and has identified over 30 locations for strategic levee setbacks as a part of their comprehensive floodplain management strategy. These levee setback projects emulate a more natural river and help to restore the natural watershed process. The picture on the left is a revetment that includes channel roughening to encourage the river away from a major arterial road, which is behind these trees right here. The picture on the right shows red lines. This is the former location of a levee. And you can see how the river, as quoted from, I think, Bob Carey in a previous presentation, the river has come back to life. And it really shows in this picture. Of the 30 proposed projects indicated on the map on the upper right, 11 are currently in progress. Another action that the group engages in is the acquisition of flood-prone properties. So acquiring flood-prone properties and removing the at-risk structure reduces the overall risk of flooding immediately. Because when there's no structure in the way of the river any longer, the risk of flooding is low, if any. Since 1990, Pierce County has removed approximately 240 insurable structures in the floodplain, with 118 structures removed in the past 7 years alone. There's still over 1,000 at-risk structures remaining. Ideal freshwater survival of returning salmonids is around 10%. Between 2013 and 2018, the freshwater survival of adult Chinook returning to the Puyallup River has ranged from 5% to 0.19%. While there are many factors that influence salmon populations, ecological restoration actions in the freshwater system address an important component of their life cycle. Restoration projects are in addition to the floodplain reconnection projects and include channel spanning works such as large woody debris, riparian restoration, side channel, and backwater channel creation. In the past 7 years, FFtF partners have initiated habitat restoration on over 169 acres. Agriculture in the Puyallup watershed has experienced significant declines, with approximately 70% of ag lands lost between 1950 and 2007. Despite this loss of lands, agriculture is alive and well. Easements work to ensure that remaining ag land in Pierce County persists into the future, and compared to commercial, residential, or industrial development, agriculture, due to fewer structures, is a desirable and compatible floodplain land use. Agriculture is also a natural use of the rich soils of the floodplain found nowhere else. The map on the right side of the slide highlights the highest priority projects within Pierce County, with the highest priority areas found within the Puyallup Watershed in this area. These high priority areas are identified through a rigorous prioritization process. The Floodplains for the Future effort is built on established plans and strategies such as these listed above. FFtF partners come together to advance these plans, which are typically specific to the individual interests, and they implement them by collaborating, coordinating, and leveraging to increase the pace and magnitude of implementation towards the shared vision that I shared at the beginning. So how do we in the partnership make sure that the actions we are undertaking actually advance towards the outlined vision and goals that I have above? We do that through a robust monitoring plan. So this adaptive management plan, how we also refer to it, builds integration and trust through the tracking of 18 different metrics that cover the range of anticipated FFtF benefits. Along with specific FFtF actions, the effort also tracks the investments made into these actions and then changes on the landscape as well that are outside of the control of the partnership. The results are collected, reviewed, and discussed annually by the FFtF partners to help them understand progress of the partnership and to set direction moving forward. The shared monitoring plan or adaptive management plan promotes open discussion across interests, builds trust, and is the source of many of the stats that I've mentioned in this presentation. Recovering an entire watershed is no small feat. Here in the Puyallup, the estimated investment to implement the projects is around 400 to 600 million. There are investments tracked since 2013, and I highlighted here funding that has been received from the Floodplains by Design program that Bob Carey was talking about earlier. So that's a big chunk of the funding. It's the orange, the blue, the yellow, and that doesn't account for 2021 expenditures. That's just through 2021. This is a working structure of our partnership. It looks homemade and drafty because it is. I tend to think of Floodplains for the Future less of a thing and more of a coming together of things. Sometimes that's around a plan and sometimes that's around a conflict. But either way, FFtF exists as a space between fish, farm, and flood to host collaborative work and increase the capacity of partners to work together productively for the benefit of the watershed. We have different meetings at different levels, the IMG meeting, which is high level, the leads, which is fairly detailed. And then we have this disappearing task group and site-specific group meetings that are very specific to one task, one site. And all of our partners are welcome to attend any of those, depending on how involved they would like to get. We worked with the panelists today to come up with a list of collaborative wins and lessons learned, and I'm sure we can talk about these more in details. I don't want to take up too much more time here, but I'll run through these really quick. Sometimes a successful collaboration leads to no action in the short term, and that's okay. Maybe a year later, because it's on everyone's radar, amazing action happens, and that happened with one of our farm acquisitions. Not every project involves every partner or interest, but every project should. Doesn't always happen, but should involve every interested partner. Collaboration is resource intense. While transformative, it's not always the best path. A lot of times trust between partners allows one organization to take the lead and move something forward while the other partners trust that it's going to be implemented in a way that they align with. Indicators of a successful collaboration are sometimes small. Sometimes it happens in a phone call between organizations. Doesn't mean no conflict. Sometimes we have conflict and we work through it together. Accepting lessons from past non-collaborative solutions, setting aside that maybe we didn't collaborate well 10 years ago, and that project is still being implemented. And we can't change it now, but we can learn lessons from that moving forward. Taking the first step, don't be afraid to call people, partners, even though they're outside your organization, and then maximize that post-meeting time. So take advantage to reach out to someone that you don't work with as often. And then shifting gears a bit, I would like to highlight a few ways in which our local tribes, the Puyallup Tribe of Indians and the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, have shaped both the Floodplains for the Future effort and the Puyallup Watershed. We do have a fisheries biologist on our panel today from the Puyallup tribe who works on the ground in salmon recovery, which is a very important component of the work FFtF is doing. But the history of the tribe's involvement in collaboration with the Puyallup Watershed is rich and dynamic. There's a lot of words on here. I'll scan through the bolded ones quickly, but if anyone's interested, I think this presentation will be available. Is that okay, Dan? For people to go back and look at in more detail. So there's work on establishing new policy around levee vegetation management, the Land Claims Settlement Act of 1988, which included an agreement for the tribe, the state, and the local governments to work together to protect fishing habitat, amongst many other outcomes. The Puyallup tribe is a property owner in the lower Puyallup Basin. The Puyallup tribe, this one I think is probably one of the most relevant to the partnership in it directly, but they developed the first Puyallup River watershed catalog in 1999. This continues to inform work advanced by FFtF partners, and it established the basis for the identified sites in the Pierce County 2008 setback levee feasibility study that really forms the backbone of the FFtF partnership. Both Muckleshoot and Puyallup tribes are NERDA trustees, Natural Resource Damage Assessment, that funds much of the work that's done in the Puyallup. They're a key partner in collecting, managing, providing data for salmon survival, adult returns, and water quality. Respected leaders with broad expertise in fish science and habitat needs and usage. Participation in our various meetings. Co-leading research with South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group. Participation in our local lead entity. Official review of actions through permitting and SEPA, which is our state permitting process. Contributing funding and seeking additional grant funding to support these efforts, and connecting the broader partnership to larger organizations as well. So with that, I definitely encourage everyone to go back and read this very astute quote on how collaboration functions within our watershed. Because of time, I'm going to go ahead and sail past it. And today we have 6 panelists here to answer your questions about this work, which we'll go ahead and introduce them, have them each quickly say what they do, and then we can jump into panel questions. So start with Helmut. You want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. My name is Helmut Schmidt. I'm with Pierce County Surface Water Management. I am the Floodplain Services Supervisor, which is a section in the Floodplain and Watershed Services section. And been with Pierce County for about 34 years, and I've seen work everything from road maintenance to floods. Right now, Floodplain Services does everything where there's too much water. And I work for Anne Marie, who's next.
Thank you, Helmut. My name is Anne Marie Marshall-Dody. I'm Pierce County's Floodplain and Watershed Services Manager, and I'm also the Floodplain Administrator for the county. Pierce County Surface Water Management and our group, the Floodplain and Watershed Services Group, takes care of making sure we get water from Mount Rainier to the Puget Sound without hurting anyone, that the animals that live within that water are okay, that the water quality of it is okay. We're sort of the soup to nuts, everything that we don't build, we plan. And that is what our group does. Kathleen and Helmut are integral to our floodplain services portion of it. But we also address the water quality and the salmon enhancement projects and partner often with many of the people on our panel.
Hey, and Kristin.
Right. I'm Kristin Williamson. I work for the South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group, which is a nonprofit, non-government in Washington State. There are 14 regional fisheries enhancement groups that were created out of legislation in 1991 to basically be kind of small, agile, grant accepting agencies to do restoration projects on the ground. So the South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group, we sit on the Floodplains for the Future initiative as the sort of the fish lead, but we have a whole fish science and habitat committee that that we coordinate to bring that science and knowledge of the fisheries work into the Puyallup Floodplains for the Future initiative.
Thank you. Isabel?
Hi, I'm Isabel Ragland, and I'm a senior program manager in water quality with Pierce Conservation District, and we work with landowners and citizens to restore and protect our natural resources. I also represent the Conservation District as the Adaptive Management Lead on the Floodplains for the Future program.
Thank you. And Mike?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Poteet. I'm a senior planner with Pierce County Planning and Public Works. I coordinate the agricultural program. Been with the program for almost 2 years with a background in the private sector. Try to bring some perspective to our agricultural producers in the county as to how their activities influence, some of the floodplain services work, and also how some of their practices can negatively impact some of our habitat work that takes place in the county, while simultaneously helping farms with general issues like permitting and worker safety and market access and things of that nature.
Thank you. And Andrew?
My name is Andrew Berger. I'm a senior stockist and biologist, Puyallup Tribe Fisheries. I'm involved with the group mostly kind of at the lower level that you saw in the presentation, kind of organizing, planning all things fish. My primary duty with the tribe is to partake in stream surveys and abundance estimates for juvenile fish. But yeah, it's a really great group of folks to work with, and looking forward to some questions.
Thank you all. And then someone who's not necessarily one of our panelists, but a special guest nonetheless. I want to have Sarah Colleen do a quick introduction as well. Maybe Dan, could you
Oh yeah, I just I'll have unmuting.
Okay, you should be good to go, Sarah Colleen.
Okay. I guess good morning. I'm excited about being on this, invited to listen on this conversation around a very important topic. I'm a citizen of the Quinault Nation. I am a descendant of one of the 5 chief families at Quinault, and I have been working for 35 plus years in tribal, state, federal, and now county relations. I was our tribe's first tribal member attorney. And of course, I have 2 brilliant children, David and Melanie Montgomery. My family, past, present, and future, are leaders, fishermen, fisherwomen, whalers, sealers, teachers, and I guess that last but not least, since 2018, I'm senior counsel to our elected executive, Bruce Dan Meyer. I was hired to assist the county in developing, nourishing, enhancing county tribal relations, and hopefully institutionalize that process. I was very glad to hear the chief, his words and his song. It was really nice because it came from a traditional space, and it gave me hope. It gave me confidence, and that, we are on the right course, on the right path in, working in this arena. And I was also very happy to hear many of the comments from the leaders from Canada. Let First Nations take the lead, develop collaboration, bring together all the partners at the very beginning, and working in partnership, working together, so primary, so kind of fundamental in working with the First Nations. I think that's what we're doing here in Pierce County, what we want to do here in Pierce County, and what we hope to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, Colleen, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introductions. Kathleen, shall I start feeding in some questions? Does that sound good? I'll pass them to you and then.
Yeah.
So we have one question from Jillian. The watersheds presented so far are significantly smaller than the Fraser. Which of the lessons learned or principles could be applied at a much bigger scale?
Yeah, the Fraser Valley is enormous. I was looking at that. It really drains like the majority of what we would consider like Western Washington. It's an enormous system. I think I'll chime in on this one, and then if anybody else wants to as well from our partnership, please feel free. I think that I'm not sure. I think any of these could be applied on a small scale that would be impactful and hopefully snowball to a larger scale, maybe more on a reach scale or a specific area. We have collaboration that happens on site specific projects. So sometimes the people that work at a place such as Clear Creek, which is one small area between Puyallup and Tacoma, often are different than the partners working up the watershed at another site called South Prairie Creek. So it just really depends on where you're at, who's relevant to the conversation. And a lot of times people don't participate where they're not interested. And so that helps us really navigate who should be in what conversation. And that kind of comes back to that structure piece, allowing for watershed scale conversations as well as site specific conversations, because those people can really differ. Anyone else have anything to add about that? Oh, 25% of BC. Yeah, it's huge. Any panelists want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, the Puyallup Watershed is a tenth of the size of the Fraser, but it may be short and dynamic. It moves a ton of sediment. You got to remember, we have basically a 14,000 foot pile of gravel at the end of the basin that's trying to get to Puget Sound. So Pierce County has probably the most geologic relief. We go from 14,000 feet to sea level in about 60 miles. So that in itself is something to consider when you're looking at sediment management. How do you live with the river and how do you interact? So scale becomes much more of an issue. So less of an issue, excuse me.
Any other thoughts, or shall we move on to the next?
Let's go ahead and keep moving.
Unless Bob, did you have something you wanted to chime in there? No, okay.
Well, just real quick, I think many of the lessons learned apply regardless of scale. It might not be the exact solution set, but the general approach of bringing people together, building trust, really collaborating towards multiple benefit, flexing. It's a very important aspect of floodplains by design writ large, but also the work in the Puyallup is to flex to the local needs and priorities and the system constraints that you have in that place. Having a system of accountability so that all the different interest groups make sure that are achieving the results they want. I think all those things apply irrespective of scale.
I think for me, one of the hardest things to learn as a government agency is to let go, and that you don't have to be in charge of everything. And so to lead with an open hand, which is so hard because your fist wants to close, but probably that as a local government agency, that focusing on what is really important. Is it more important who does the work, or is it more important that the solutions are solved, and how we get there is less important? And so that collaborative nature and coming to the realization that we don't have to solve it ourselves, even though we're the government and we're here to help. Since that works so well for everyone, that solution probably isn't the best solution, and that letting go of that, which there are days I struggle with it, but letting go of that probably for me in this whole is probably one of the lessons I would push out there for everyone, no matter what the size of your organization or the size of the basin within which you're working, that focusing on that the work gets done and the solutions are solved is more important than who does it and who's in control.
I'd like to just pile on something real quick too. I mean, I think even the importance of sort of sharing knowledge and building that collective consciousness about how a watershed works is even more important at a bigger scale, because it's all interconnected, right? Even though this tributary over here of a massive basin might be functioning very different than another one over there, they all come together eventually, and the fish, you know, are so mobile, so they move throughout. So building that integration is, you know, just builds that knowledge base, which is power to sort of understand kind of understand and seek the solutions that to the problems that you're facing.
I just want to add a little piece of that too. I think what's been huge for our collaboration is the coming together once a year to discuss the results from that year that we've collected, and just everyone from all interests sitting in the same room, looking at the same set of numbers and understanding where the problems lie with not only their interests, but across all interests. I think that's been really huge to building trust and collaboration too.
We've had some pretty amazing aha moments in the Results Summit, which is what Isabel's referring to, where, you know, the whole group sat in a room and said, wow, we really need ag. Like, this is really important. And I think it was kind of a moment of like, okay, now how do we work together? It was pivotal, I think, for this group.
And I would add one final comment to that. And sometimes we get caught up in, you know, the temporal nature of everything, time, and it's not on our side with so many things that feel so critical, but time actually is on your side, and you need to take the time to do the work together. And a good illustration of that is one of the slides that Kathleen showed. You know, it's been a generation since some of the legal statutes were passed about providing certain protections and remunerations to tribal groups. And here we are, you know, 30 odd years later, we're just really making progress now. And so that is unfortunate. However, it shows that, you know, things do evolve, things will change, and things should get faster now for us. We've taken those hard first steps. And so use your time, take those wins and those losses and use those every single year to strengthen the partnerships that you have.
That's great. I love how that question kind of snowballed into and unleashed some really much bigger thoughts on how you do work together. And whatever the scale of the Fraser, you guys are giving us some inspiration, I think. Next question that's burning for a couple of people. I'm going to bundle Pamela Zevitz and Kristin Walter's question here is about kind of the difference in funding between Washington State and what we have here in BC. I don't know if it's really fair to ask you guys since you're not in BC, but it's basically asking how can we address this north of the border? What are some things we could learn about how we source those funds?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, yeah, go ahead. You seem excited. You're excited about this one.
I think while it looks great across Washington State, there are definitely communities within Washington State counties that have more funding available to them than not. And while we're as envious of our King County partners to the north of us, who have a lot of funding, Pierce County is actually small but mighty. And the way that we've been able to be small but mighty is that we incrementally step our way there, that we work across a large range of projects over time, and breaking projects up into small bite-sized pieces helps snowball and demonstrate to grant funders that you are successful. And the more successful you are at not only spending the funding that you receive through a grant, the more successful you become, we have found, to receiving grants. And that we also have found that we also become more successful in getting additional service fees provided to us through our council, who sets the fees for our surface water rates. We also passed a flood control zone district, which is a semi-quasi government agency that taxes the entire county. It's a much smaller rate than they generate elsewhere, but we were able to demonstrate the need through that. But it's through these small incremental bits. Surface water management in Pierce County actually hasn't been around very long. Helmut was one of the first employees, and he's been with the county, what, 36 years, 34 years? Yeah, 34 years in July. So surface water management actually hasn't been around that long, but we've made a big impact. We've made big strides, and we continue to move forward. And I think it's like Kathleen says in one of her slides, is taking that first step is probably, don't think so big. You don't have to go in so big. We have one of our partners we work with, and I love them to death, but they think so big and think they have to have all the money in their hand before they start the project. And that's just not true. You can start with small bite-sized pieces and move your way up. And I think that's demonstrated also by the work that Isabel and Kristin are able to do with smaller funding available to their organizations than what we have at Pierce County, and the amount of impact they are able to make with small amounts of money. So don't get intimidated by not having like big pots of money.
I'd like to add a little bit to that, what Anne-Marie says. What Anne-Marie's always hammered home is that it's not a project unless it's in a plan. And what we've done a good job of is building that planning foundation where, look, we have this list of projects, we're queued up, we're ready to go. And we've got projects that are at multiple phases of development. And so when you do get that money and you can demonstrate that, look, I have the capacity to digest this money in the time allotted. So that helps a lot when you're looking for money.
Definitely. And from the partnership perspective, it's about cobbling it together too. So Pierce County's funding is really meant to be spent at Pierce County for these levee setback projects. But when we have a partnership, we're able to contract with our partners a little easier and disperse those funding sources to other partners, and to really focus that money in areas that the partnership would like to see. So it's this collaborative benefit that kind of ripples out through the watershed for the benefit of the watershed. And piecemealing, all these grants require match. And how do we do that? Well, when we have a program such as this, we can borrow match from each other as needed and partner across for different grant sources. And then, of course, a nod to Floodplains by Design, which is a big chunk of the state funding that we've been able to receive. And that's an effort that's received quite a bit of state funding as well. And, I think $70 million is impressive in the last 10 years, and to put that on the ground. And at the beginning of the presentation, I noted that to really recover this watershed for farm fish and flood, we're probably looking at $400 to $600 million, and that's only in actions that have been identified. So that may not even recover the watershed, but as far as we can see or predict, we expect it to be more like that. So it is kind of a small chunk. Chomp it away like Pac-Man. Anything else on that?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, I think the collaboration helps really drop out a culture of competition for money too, because you got this, you have this plan, and we all sort of have this vision of like how the watershed, how projects within the watershed can move forward. And rather than competing with each other, like one project competing with another, we're sort of understanding that if we stage them in a way, that work will continue, and my project over here will get done eventually, or there's a lot less of a my project attitude. I think it's the watershed working together to advance good work, and each project sort of pays it forward for the next one, right? Because you can show success and build on that success.
I think I want to build on something because it triggered something for me, Kristin, is the other thing is it's hard to find grants to do that necessary planning and studies and finding the money to do that. But that's what local government can bring to the table. And one of the things we've been working on a lot as a partnership is bringing forward our studies and the work that we're doing, and then being able to tag on other partners to that work, so that if they need just a little bit more of beyond the base work that we're doing, they're able to partner on and get that little bit more and benefit from the work we were already doing. And so being able to share that work is great. And sometimes we're really great at it, and sometimes we don't have the mechanisms in place. So learning to have your agreements in place ahead of time so you can take advantage of the opportunities as they pop up, and then all the conversations that Kathleen is able to generate between us, where we meet at our leads meeting and talk about things coming up, is when we can say things like, oh, hey, I'm doing a low-level LiDAR flight of all the river systems. Does anyone want to tag on and grab something I'm not already covering? And that helps stretch our dollars a lot, particularly for those who can't otherwise necessarily afford doing those studies that are so necessary.
Yeah, this is Andrew from Puyallup. I just want to jump in. It's probably a little bit of a repeat, but I think that a lot of the funding sources that we see almost even have some kinds of requirements, or they'll rank higher if you have partners. And so I think that's really important to not forget about that, right? Talk to your legislature, make sure these requirements are in hand to not force, but to say, hey, look, if you reach out across the aisle, then your project is going to rank higher, even though, and then that opens the door, right, to more collaborative efforts down the road, like Anne Marie's talking about, oh, by the way, we do have this money here for X. Oh, well, that was going to be part of our plan. It just starts the ball rolling. So just want to jump in. Thanks.
I would just also note, just to build on that a little bit, and this gets to one of the questions that I think was in Slido too, is the reason we've been as successful as we've been with the Floodplains by Design funding is because of that multi-interest collaboration. I mean, when we showed up in 2013 and had First Nations, environmental organizations, local governments, and agricultural organizations all requesting the same thing, they're like, what? This doesn't happen. And we asked for $33 million that year. The legislature appropriated 44. So more, in other words, than we asked for, which also never happens. And it was because they wanted to see more people, more communities benefit from that kind of funding. So it's really critical aspect of this work.
Thanks so much, everyone, for all these great answers. Yeah, and there's some good stuff going on in the chat too. So yeah, please do throw some thoughts in the chat. I'm conscious of time. We're only 5 minutes away, and it's such a meaty conversation. So Kathleen and I have been chatting a little bit back and forth about whether we could stick around for another 15 minutes. I did want to ask Chief Chappel if you could stick around for another 15 minutes, or if you'd like to give some reactions now, and then we can kind of let people dribble out as they like.
I can tough it out, I guess. I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I think just the one thing that really hits me is the collaboration, and I think the one thing that I need to share is for all the Canadian. I was kind of scanning through who's online, and the difference between individual First Nations in Canada, independent First Nations or tribal affiliations or organizations, and then when we talk about sovereign treaty nations in Washington State, very, very different structures, very different funding processes. So it is a little bit different. Everybody gets excited and says, wow, they've been so involved and been able to do this and contribute to this. And, we're in kind of the same, we're all applying and advocating for the same dollars. So we're kind of battling each other. So I'll just kind of say that my 2 minutes, but I'll hang out for a bit.
Thanks, Chief Chappel. Yeah, and more reactions later definitely would be appreciated. Yeah, Yeah, I think we're going to stick with the Slido because it's a panning out to some good answers. Our next question from Jennifer Thacker is, how do you monitor infrastructure projects in the watershed that are outside the partnership's control? And how do you collaborate with those projects?
A great question. Most of the levee setback projects, most, not all, are occurring within Pierce County or led by Pierce County. So I think that it's that open hand that Anne-Marie was talking about, where Pierce County brings these to the table. And I also think there's a lot of trust in there. So, you know, it's not that this whole partnership is at the table discussing how these levee setback projects get implemented, but rather trust has come out of this partnership that most of the partners say, go ahead, Pierce County, like, we trust you, you have fish biologists, you have this proven track record, you have this plan that really elicits like the details of what's going to happen, and we'll just track it at a high level and give input when it feels right, like when it's necessary or when we need to do a little guidance. So I think that's part of it. Well, the question disappeared off of there. I was kind of looking at it. Was it two parts?
Yeah, how do you monitor infrastructure projects that are outside partnerships control, and how do you collaborate?
Yeah, and then I think this would be a good one too, because there's some big reconnection projects that have happened amongst the partners that are outside of Pierce County. And I think a lot of it, maybe Kristin and Andrew would be good on this one. But I would like to think that a lot of the collaboration happens through the partnership structure, where we have meetings in place where people can come and talk, kind of that coming together of things to discuss. And we're also tracked by the monitoring program, the adaptive management program, as far as like results. So there's kind of a few different ways, but Kristin, Isabel, Andrew, that might be a good question for you guys to tackle.
I want to build on Kathleen's thing for a little bit too, is because in Washington state, it's the counties that are authorized to do flood control. And so really, unlike say even in Oregon, where that's not the case, we as a county government are the ones that are responsible for ensuring flood control. So it sort of focuses us. So there isn't really big projects being done from levee setbacks by anyone but a county organization. It's the small, meaningful projects outside of our area that the tribes and South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group are able to do that help improve those projects, and they're able to work in areas we can't. Like, I love some of Kristin's upper watershed work that she gets to do. It's really cool.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, so prior to Floodplains for the Future, there's like a salmon recovery lead entity that is a big partnership also that has functioned since about 1999 in the watershed. And then there was, there's the flood, and then there's all the ag stuff. So in going back to Kathleen's graphic, where we all intersect in the middle is sort of where Floodplains for the Future has now operated to bring all of that together. And that monitoring plan of the work that Isabel does, that brings, kind of calls all the data, that's all the data collection that is happening by the tribes, the data collection of the projects that the salmon recovery people are doing, and as well as that the ag community, and pulls it all together. So that's sort of how the partnership, the Floodplains for the Future partnership, has functioned to kind of wrap our arms around sort of everything that's going on in the watershed and look at different infrastructure projects.
I'd also just add to that real quick, non-reconnection type projects. If an external entity comes in and needs to do a project, say, State Department of Transportation needs to do something along a state corridor that is managed by DOT versus Pierce County's Public Works, they're invited to join. That just expands the collaboration that much further. And it may just be for a one-off project, or it may be, in some perpetuity, but that's kind of the genius of it, is any project that takes place within the watershed is suddenly, welcome to be part of the bigger picture.
That's a great point, Mike. Thanks. And Kristin, Sue, Anne-Marie. Anything else on that one?
That great answers. The next one that's popping up to the top in Slido is another gap in BC. So yeah, we're talking, we've got a lot of gaps. We're feeling
We have a lot of gaps too, we promise.
We have no overarching regional plan for the lower Fraser, let alone the whole Fraser watershed. So any learnings from county or regional plans in Washington?
Let's serve this one on a platter to Anne-Marie and Helmut.
Actually, this one isn't us. So while we handle regional planning within Pierce County, the Puget Sound Partnership handles the planning efforts for kind of what you're talking about here for the Puget Sound Basin. They've been working on it for a number of years. You can Google Puget Sound Partnership. I've worked on, I mean, all of us have worked on various initiatives over the years with Puget Sound Partnership. It's kind of a coming together of all the plans we're already doing and setting targets and goals for us to try and reach and achieve. I think at our local level, we're actually, for the first time, the county is taking on a truly regional approach to floodplain management. We're looking at all floodplain or flooding issues within the county, because we not only have riverine flooding, we have coastal, we have groundwater, which is a bit unusual, and then we have urban flooding. And we're putting it all into one plan, and we're coordinating with all our cities. And I will tell you how this goes in a couple of years, because we're just getting started. But I am very hopeful that by the time we are done, we'll have a more fully comprehensive flood plan from all levels across the entire county, which would be a big deal for Pierce County to have one plan, looking at it as holistically as we possibly can, and balancing the rights of the communities themselves to do their own planning, and acknowledging their responsibility to do planning within their agencies, and then balancing that with our tribal partners. We actually, one of the things Sarah Colleen very much introduced us and reminded us is that when we start our planning processes, to go before we put pen to paper to our tribal partners and say, hey, we're starting this plan. What do you think? And we had been terrible. I mean, to be honest, we've been terrible about it. And so the first time we did it, they're like, no, seriously, where's your piece of paper? I'm like, no, I don't have anything. I took the comments you gave me the last time you yelled at me, and I'm coming to you and say, before I start this plan, what should I look out for? And so they actually really, the Puyallup tribe, the Muckleshoot tribe, I think not Squaxin, but even the Nisqually tribes, help form the scope for that planning process. And so what I would say is, as you want to start this process, I would start with, before you put pen to paper, go and talk with your First Nations and find out what is most important to them. And one of the things that it's taken us years but to realize is we almost always agree on what we want to try and achieve. Where we differ is how we get there, and learning to let go of how we get there, so long as the end result is what we need to have happen. And I can report back in the future how well it goes, because at least I'm willing to take the risk to see how it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll try again another time.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think also Anne-Marie indicated the smaller plans, kind of those local plans that are done by different local organizations. And I think much like we cobble our funding together, we also cobble plans. And there's a lot of power in the people implementing these plans. So our lead entity, which is our fish recovery, salmon recovery group, has a plan, and the tribe has a plan, and surface water management, which is just a portion of Pierce County, had a plan. And the implementers of those plans got together and they were like, oh, look, our plans are kind of similar here. Maybe let's work on that together. So maybe while there wasn't like a regional plan to do that project in an integrated way, the people doing the work on the ground were like, let's do it. Let's put our money together. Let's put our work together. Like, let's try to implement this well. So I think not necessarily need to wait for a regional plan. I mean, you can cobble work together locally, and just as the people who are working on the ground can do that too.
One thing I'd like to emphasize is the work that Isabel does is super important, because sooner or later, someone's going to ask you, is it working? And people love numbers and people love statistics. And by having a group that looks at those metrics on the entire watershed scale and compiles them from whoever's doing the work, you can get a better picture of your watershed health and demonstrate what you're achieving to potential funders and what your trajectory looks like. And it actually shows you that how much more you need to do.
And I just want to jump in with the important part of our plan is the data we collect is from our partners. They are not only our partners in projects, but our partners in data collection. And our plan is really more of a landscape level, high level look at what work is being done and what the impacts of that work is achieving, as opposed to a project by project by project. You know, here's the results of this, here's the results of this. But it really does give us that whole big picture view of what we're doing and what we're achieving.
Wow, great answers. That's wonderful. Now I'm seeing it's 11:40. We still have a lot of questions in the Slido piling up. I do want to honor everybody's time as well. I wonder if we could do like one more question. I did have like a question in mind that would to kind of finish things off, but I'm maybe thinking about plugging that one in there. I was kind of feeling like yeah, do you mind if I do that? Plug a question in there that's a bit from my mind for closing things up? Or how many people want to stay on in the panel? How many people want to keep going? Thumbs up if you're in to go. Okay.
I was going to say too, you know, if we still are running out of time, everyone can throw their email addresses into the chat too, so we can, you know, we can do that too from the panel. So
yeah, let's. I mean, that would be great if panelists are willing to share their email. If anybody wants to connect with them, that's a really generous offer.
I think we can go for about 10, 12 more minutes, it sounds like.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Okay, in that case, let's carry on with the Slido. So our next question up is, what are the policies in place that help local governments and counties take planning and action steps without getting overwhelmed by regs and permitting processes?
I'm gonna leave this up to anyone on the panel who wants to take it on.
Trying to understand the question, you know, when we're developing projects, like I said before, you know, it has to be identified in a plan, and then we start building the project. We build all that into the project, all that time that is necessary to do the permitting, to do the outreach, so you have to get a different mindset for project management when you're doing projects like this. It's not your basic engineering project anymore, because you've got all these different dynamics that are involved. You've got sociological impacts, you've got cultural impacts, you've got all these different things that you have to think about when you're planning one of these projects. So for an engineer, it's difficult sometimes because they see a problem, they develop a solution, they implement the solution, but it's not that surgical anymore. Rivers are a living thing.
I think a recent story, Kristin too is a superstar with, I don't know, how many permits did you have on South Prairie Creek Preserve over how many years?
I think it was 13 permits, and the project itself took 18 years from start, acquisition of the property to the habitat restoration project.
It was $6 million. Sorry.
It was $6 million total if you include the acquisition of 129 acres of floodplain and a half mile of South Prairie Creek, which is a major tributary to the Carbon River on the Puyallup system.
It's like, just keep swimming.
I guess in Washington State also, we are subjected to we probably have some of the toughest regulations across the US. Like when we go to floodplain conferences and we talk to our partners from like Virginia, And they say things like, well, we just filled the wetland. I'm like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? We're just used to it. We don't find it overwhelming. We don't know any better. So like all of our projects are that way. But I think Helmut and Kristin tied into it is when we start our planning process, we set up from the time we do our plan. We look at all of the things that we know we might have an issue with, and we run an environmental impact statement over that entire plan so that when we come out of our planning process, we've gone through public review, we've gone through some environmental review from the highest level, and that as we start to implement the individual projects within that plan, we're moving and cutting down on the process. We don't have to run an environmental impact statement for each and every project. We've already done that. So that really helps speed it up, but you're still going to get like 13 permits. But I guess we don't know any better. It's just how we do it. So we don't find it overwhelming. It's just what our life is like. We don't know any better.
I'd add one other point to, projects don't happen unless they're part of a plan. So we already kind of understand what the permitting is high level going to look like going into it. But that plan part is also critical because we don't make plans without doing all the community outreach as well. And whether that is broad-based community outreach or really project specific for, a group of landowners or a certain geography that we know is going to be more imminently impacted, either way, that happens right up front. And so we get that out there, which big picture does streamline it, although it feels like a lot of work at the beginning.
That's great. At this point, I am wondering if we should wrap up. I think we're having a lot of fun here. It's not often you just go over a meeting and then we're kind of getting the casual chit chats. You might not get that kind of effect. I am tempted to ask Chief Chappel again if you would like to share any kind of last words and reactions before I think we kind of wrap up and maybe take the rest of the questions and see if we can convince our panelists to answer them some other way offline or something like that.
The first thing our relatives and our friends to the south, for the collaboration and the work that you're doing, both with indigenous tribes and county and agricultural, all of the above, all of this, the stakeholders. And here in BC, I did sit on a table at the Fraser Basin Council, which was developing the regional flood plan. And unfortunately, that table, we as First Nations, we were late. I think kind of a word of, I don't want to say a word of caution, but a word of next steps in moving forward for our Canadian participants here is really, municipality or regional district. And I'm just, dealing with a regional district right now. And, we've stopped projects because we weren't included in the consultation process. And, the relationship in America, the relationship between the tribes and the county or the districts or the area, the state, it is much different than it is here. But realize and understand that we have the DRIPA legislation coming down the line. It's coming. So this collaborative working relationship that we see in this presentation south of the border, it's coming here. So let's warm up to that. Let's start opening those conversations. I see municipalities on here. I see FLNRO. I see different organizations online. start engaging in those conversations now, because that's really, the real, one of the crooks that I heard of the presentation today was that collaboration and discussion, which was massive, right? We ran into an issue a few places here in the Fraser Valley between municipalities and First. We run into the issues already. I'll give you we run into these struggles, and then we as First Nations, we kind of say, okay, that's it, project's on hold or it's stopped, and we're going to implement our rights and title here. But I think one of the things that I liked about hearing this and in comparison was, the Fraser is, I read it on here, 25% of British Columbia, the Fraser River watershed. And is that, and I'm just questioning and posing to everybody on board, is that too big of a scope? Is it too big? But there needs to be an interconnectedness of all those things, but is that too grandiose? How are we working on a regional level? How are we working on a bite-sized pieces type discussion, so that we're all going, okay, we're okay with this? Here in Canada, it's Metro Van, Fraser Valley, and then as we move up the canyon. So, really, one thing I'm going to reiterate over and over and over again is open those lines of communication. Municipalities, regional districts that are online, don't be afraid to reach out to, I'm going to kind of put our EPS out there a little bit. Don't be afraid to reach out to Jillian here. I think Jillian could probably put her email in the box if she's not already on lunch already. But, just to bridge some of those gaps. I think there's been a real apprehension on this side of the line to, okay, oh, there, she's still here. Good, she's earning her keep. I think it's really important that we start to lessen those, really, really shrink those gaps that we've had between First Nations, municipalities, regional districts. There's been this weird, over the generations, there's been kind of a weird thing there. So I think I really appreciate your presentation. I really appreciate the good work that you're doing down south, and incorporating this, and I heard it all through the presentation, the interconnectedness of everything. That is so important. And I really appreciate the words, whoever said that, I believe it was Anne, that said, taking that, I need to be in control here. And I'm the specialist here. That, it's just, if nothing else, it just causes friction, which, then people put their boundary, their shield up. But, I appreciate the conversation. I really, really enjoyed the words and the direction that you've hopefully shared with us on this side of the line. And again, the good work that we're doing, because we're trying to do this for our children, our grandchildren. So it's very, very important work. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief Chappel. I'm so glad you were able to make it and share those feelings and thoughts. At this point, I do want to, I just saw Helmut nodding his head that we could do it at the Fraser scale.
Yeah, you can.
There we go.
I mean, it's like one bite at a time. So,
yeah.
So still, I think you could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert here, but I just imagine how amazing would that be if we did.
Yeah, you describe, you have all these different people doing work up and down the Fraser system. You can just sort of, like, I think Bob Carey's described as a backbone organization that sits there and kind of, have you talked to them, or have you been introduced to these people? And once you start to build those relationships, they stay. So
I might be a little biased, but I do think that the position of a coordinator in the middle of all of this, whose main interest is to see successful collaboration, is key, because everyone else here at the table is really coming with a specific interest or motive, and that's okay. The flood needs to reduce flood risk. The tribe and the South Sound group want to improve salmon. Mike wants to help ag, and they want to collaborate. Whereas I'm here because I want to see all of these people collaborate. And so I think that seemingly small nuance is very important. So whoever that is in your watershed, support them and help them get started, because it's really crucial to making it happen. And also, I am so impressed by how many people are on this call. And I think, you know, when Dan told me how many people were going to be attending this webinar, I was like, oh, there's appetite for collaboration here. So I think you all really want this, and it's pretty cool to see.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you have to take good care of your coordinator.
Yes.
Or she explodes.
Don't break your coordinator. #1 rule.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just want to express so much gratitude for all of you for taking the time with us today. I think we have so much to learn. And I hope it's just the start of our conversations cross-border, and whatever, if we have anything to teach, then that would be wonderful too. But just learning from each other, and especially, yeah, just so much appreciation for everybody that's shared their perspectives today. And thanks so everybody for coming, that stuck around and toughed it out through the extra time. So we'll see you again soon, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.